Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm kind of going back to chapter 1 real quick because I had a comment on one of my latest videos about a bug with the jump buffer system. So we're going to look at that bug and we're going to fix it today. Hey everybody, so I had a comment on episode 8 of chapter 1, the velocity-based jump and fall animations, and somebody who goes by the moniker of Keijo Mustaine, I have no idea how it's supposed to be pronounced, but he commented that he thinks there's a bug in the jump buffer feature. And he says it seems like when jumping within the jump buffer window, the player loses variable jump and just jumps to his max height or shoots to his apex. So we're going to dive into that today. I'll show you the bug and then I'll show you two fixes, a simple fix and a slightly more advanced fix. And they're both probably useful for different applications. Okay, so I'm running the project right here. And this bug actually might be kind of hard to reproduce. Let's see if I can reproduce it here. But essentially, if I jump and then do a jump buffer jump, you know what? Way too hard to produce. Let me show you a way we can cheat this. Okay, I'm going to go into my player script. You don't have to do this here. What we're going to do is I'm going to change the time scale of the Godot engine so that I'm just going to slow things down. We can also increase the jump buffer time to an unrealistically high value, like 1 second, but I think it's good to do both of these. So let's start with, just because this is useful, engine.timescale equals 0.5. So it's going to be half the speed. Our game's going to run at half the speed. And I will change the jump buffer time to maybe just 1 second. Okay, so I've done two things to make it really easy to get a jump buffer type of jump to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and run the project again. Now you're going to see that it's moving kind of slow. Okay, so if I just tap the button and you can see I let go. And in fact, the bug is kind of wigging out because I think the jump buffer time is so high that it thinks that I've just pressed the button within a second. A lot of weird stuff happening here, right? But essentially what the bug is even if I just barely tap the jump button, he's jumping to his full height. And essentially the cause of this issue is pretty simple, but it took me a little bit to figure out. So if we look at our fall state, when our player is falling, this is when we handle that jump buffer timer. And you can see here in our, in our handle input, if we press the jump button, we reset our timer, and during the process, we decrease that buffer timer, okay? And in our physics process, whenever we land on the floor, we check that timer. And if there's any time left on it, that means we pressed the jump button within that grace period that we want to be able to jump again. And so we simply return the jump, okay? We return this jump state. Now what happens is if you press the jump button really quickly, you can release the jump button before you hit the ground, but still within that window. And so what happens is the player jumps, but you've already released the jump button. And if we look at our jump state, we're listening here to see when we've released the jump button. But that's never going to happen if you press that button really quickly, right? Because you've already released it during the fall state, okay? So this, in essence, is what causes the bug. So now you never have a way to have a shorter jump. We've removed or circumvented the ability for us to do a variable height jump. So there's two ways we can fix this. I'm going to implement it first a simpler way, where we're simply going to require that the jump button still be pressed when you hit the ground in order for it to do this jump buffer type of jump. Okay, so you have to be holding it down where it has to still be pressed. This isn't necessarily the ideal solution, but it's a really simple one, so I just want to cover it because I think it's worth doing. And then we'll do a solution that allows us to still press it quickly like we do here, but we'll just add in a little bit of extra logic to make sure that we handle this entering the jump state and not having the jump button held down, okay? So we'll first start with that simple solution here in our fall state script. Okay, time to try implementing the first fix. So what we're going to do is when we check our buffer timer, we're going to add an additional condition to this if statement. So we're checking to see if there's any time left on the buffer timer, and then we can say and, okay? Another way to write this in what's more traditional programming style are two ampersands. But I like doing the and in Godot because it's kind of like maybe GD script best practice, and I like how it highlights it in red. So what we want to check is if our input, so even though we're not in our input handled, we can still access this global input class, and we can say is action pressed. And there's a couple options in here, like is action just pressed. That's only going to return true if the action was pressed like that frame, like it barely pressed it the first time it was recorded. But there's just is action pressed, and then we can select jump from the action list. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, is there any jump buffer timer left? And is this button being pressed currently? And then if so, we can return the jump state. So I'm going to turn my jump buffer timer back down to 0.2 because with that time scale, this will still be easy to test and troubleshoot. Okay, so if I jump, right, everything's looking fine. I can press and hold. And in fact, let's go down here so we got more space to jump. Now, when I jump, I'm going to do a buffer jump here. I'm just going to jump again when I'm close to the ground, and I'm going to release it instantly like I was before. And instead of the player jumping high like this, right, he should do like a short jump like that. Okay, so here we go. Nope, I didn't quite do it actually. There we go. That was one right there. Boink. Okay, so that actually worked. Now, if we make this jump buffer timer even smaller, then like I should have, there's some of those where I feel like I should have done a buffer jump, but I wasn't holding down the jump key. So it's pretty easy to reproduce if I press and hold the jump key, like right there. So I'm going to press it, boom. And if I press it the same timing but release it quickly, it doesn't work. Okay, so that may be a good enough solution for you, and maybe that's a good solution for something other than this jump buffer. But at this point, let's go ahead and implement the alternative solution. So in order to do this, I'm going to go ahead and just remove this. But I mean, you can keep this line if you want, and maybe just, comment it out if you want to keep it as an option. But we don't want to do both of these solutions that I'm going to show you together because they won't really play very nicely with each other. So I'm going to restore my original jump buffer check and just return the jump state. Okay. And then let's come over to our jump script. And what we need to do here is in our enter function, when we enter this state, we need to do some detection to see if we're in this weird scenario where we've had a buffer jump. Okay, so I'm just going to come all the way down to the very bottom of this script. It's fine. We can let everything else run as normal. So what we're going to do here, we're going to check if this is a buffer jump, and I'll show you how we'll do that. If it is, we want to make sure that we handle that button release kind of retroactively. Okay, so this is actually a lot simpler than you might think it is because at least the way we've got our game built, the only time we can have a buffer jump is from the fall state. So the first thing we can do is check if our previous state was the fall state. So if player.previousstate equals fall, okay, then we know that we were in the fall state. But in addition to that, we want to check one other thing because we only want to do this if this was a buffer jump and if we are no longer holding the jump key when we enter this state. So we'll say and not, because we're checking for, a negative case here. So and not input.is action pressed, and then we'll pass in the jump action. Okay. So if we've entered this state and we just came from the fall state, then we know we did a buffer jump. And then we're going to say, okay, are we not holding the jump button? And if so, that means we've already released it. So we need to handle that. Okay. And essentially what we do is we just need to handle the same things that we do in our handle input right here, okay? But we can't do it quite the same. I'm gonna go ahead and copy these 2 lines of code, paste them in here. We can't quite do it exactly the same. And the main reason is because we can't return the fall state, but we can set the velocity to half. That's what we do normally when we have that fall condition. But what we're gonna do here is instead of returning fall, we're going to access our player and just tell him to change state to the fall state. Now, there's one other thing that we need to do because otherwise we're going to get ourselves in trouble because we're doing all of this in one frame and we could potentially get ourselves into a weird situation. We may even be able to get it to be looping. I remember having some issues with this, but what we want to do is before we handle this specific piece of logic, let's wait a physics tick so that we have a chance for this state to play out a tiny bit and we know that we've cleared out our fall state. Okay, so we're not going to be changing to the states multiple times within one tick. And that'll hopefully help us avoid any other potential bugs related to this. So what we'll do is we'll say await. Have we used await yet? I don't think we have really been using it in this Metroidvania tutorial series. So this is basically turning this enter function into an asynchronous function. You can do this to most functions, but not all. In some cases, we probably can't do this, okay? But what we'll do here is we'll say await get tree. I feel like we have, I just don't remember. And then we'll say physics frame, not physics frame. Okay, that's just gonna say wait for the next physics frame and then run this code right here, okay? So by introducing that, let's go ahead and run the project one more time. And I'm still kind of slow motion. And I'm gonna jump and just press and release, and I can just kind of infinitely bounce there. And if I press and hold it, I can still get a high jump, right? And I can release and have it fall at any time. And there we go. We fixed that bug. Now, I think there might have been another bug related to doing this kind of jump on here. Yeah, there it goes. It just happened. So let's look at that one real quick. When we go through a one-way platform, it's still thinking that we need to jump again. Okay, so this other bug is actually related to a slight defect or flaw in our coding logic back in the fall state. And essentially what's happening, and this probably wouldn't happen if our jump buffer time was smaller, maybe, I'm not 100% sure, but this happens when we're landing on a one-way platform right after the apex of our fall, because we may have some residual state information left over, okay? And so what we're going to do in here is I'm in my fall state script, and in the exit, I just want to reset my buffer timer. Okay, make sure that it's set to 0 so that we're all good. And then that should hopefully clear us to put us in a better state. And let's try running this again and see if that cleared the bug. Boink, there we go. Just stayed right on top of the platform, didn't do another double jump. I'm even letting go. I'm just testing a few different scenarios. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay. So there we have it. A couple quick bug fixes just to make sure that we're a little bit more tidy on chapter 1. And thank you for pointing that out. Keijo Mutsain. I don't know, Keiho Mutsaine. I got a bug. I'll figure out your name someday, perhaps. But thank you again for pointing that out. We wouldn't have fixed this if it wasn't for you. I may not have noticed it for quite some time. I guess I should explain why I think this fixed that issue. And that's because if we leave the state and we've got most of our buffer timer remaining, you know, enough that it's still counting down, then even if we haven't pressed the jump key during this new iteration of the fall state, it's still remembering because of the timer value that it thinks we have pressed the jump key. So just by resetting this to 0 every time we exit, we know, okay, whether or not we've handled that jump key press, we're just going to reset the timer just to avoid bugs. This is a good practice. This is one of the main purposes for having this exit function. It's to clean up our state and kind of reset it to what we want its initial values to be before we run it again. Cool. So thank you for joining me for this short bug fix video. If you hadn't noticed already, I'm well into development now of chapter 2, and I've released the first 2 videos and working on the third. Really excited about that chapter. It's going to be a lot of fun because we're really making our level look pretty. I'm covering how to prepare for and create tile sets and art assets for your game, and I think we're just going to have fun. So thanks for following along. Go ahead and check that out when you're ready. And if you're new, subscribe to my channel so you can see what's coming next. And as always, we'll see you next time. Keijo Mustaine, Keijo Mustaine, Keiho Mustaine, Keiho Mustaine, Keijamustaine, Keijamustaine. I'm hopeless. There is no hope for me. I can't read.